Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to Insala's webinar. Today we'll be discussing how mentoring can close the generation gap between baby boomers and millennials and encourage these individuals to work together to benefit their organization. My name is Katie Mouton and I am the Digital Marketing Specialist at Insala. For those of you that may not be familiar with Insala, we are a leading global provider of mentoring software and consulting. We offer a variety of consultant-driven products ranging from mentoring, alumni, and offboarding solutions. Our mission is to connect organizations and people throughout their shared career journeys. If you're interested in more information about Insala or continue discussion on mentoring programs, you can follow our LinkedIn company page and join our LinkedIn group, Mentoring Thought Leaders Club, which currently has over 1,400 members. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few tips that we have to help you get the most out of this webinar. The webinar will be recorded and sent via email to everyone that has registered, so you'll be able to rewatch it at any time. We've muted all participants, but we encourage you to ask questions throughout the discussion by typing them in the questions window at the bottom of the toolbar. We'll be answering your questions throughout the webinar, so please send those at any time. You don't have to wait until the end. If we're unable to answer your questions in the time we have, please feel free to follow up with us after the webinar. We will give you our contact information. And lastly, don't forget to get social. You can tweet along with us using hashtag InsalaWebinar. For today's webinar, we gathered a panel of speakers that represent the three most dominant generations in the current workforce. I'm representing the millennial generation. Stephen Grinrod, Insala's Chief Operating Officer, is representing Generation X. And Judy Corner, Insala's Director of Mentoring Solutions, is representing the baby boomers. Judy is also your main presenter for this webinar. Over the past 30 years, she has designed and delivered mentoring workshops, mentor and mentee trainings, and successfully implementing mentoring programs at a wide range of organizations. Again, I would just like to say thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and without further delay, I'll pass things over to Judy.
Thank you, Katie, and I would like to add my welcome to those of you that have joined us in the past. Welcome back. And to those of you that have joined us for the first time, we hope to see you in the future, having to do with our other webinars on topic. Now, today, as Katie said, we're going to talk about closing that generation gap through mentoring. And we're going to do that by, kind of defining, what's a baby boomer and what's a millennial. And then what we're going to do is, and I'm not quite sure what's happening, I apologize. Then we're going to talk about the challenges of the generation gap and how mentoring can help to close that generation gap in doing that. And then we're going to help you to implement a cross-generational mentoring program as we go forward. But to get us started, Katie, will you take us through our first poll?
Sure, Judy. We'd like to know what generation everyone represents. So are you a traditionalist, a baby boomer, from Generation X, a millennial, or from Generation Z? Please choose your answer. All right, Judy, about 74% have voted. We're just going to give it a few more seconds. All right. And Judy, here are the results. So we don't have any traditionalists, but it looks like we have our biggest numbers, Generation X at 42%. We've got 32% millennials and 26% baby boomers. So the three that we're representing are the three that are on the presentation today.
That works great. Good to hear. And we kind of figured that largest generation was going to be Generation X in doing that and taking it forward. One of the things that's interesting is people are living longer, and when you look at the workforce today, you're really looking at a whole lot of generations in doing that. You're in a situation where we've got traditionalists, and they're the ones that have kind of trained the baby boomers. Now, the other thing that we know is happening is those baby boomers are retiring. And so what they're doing is they're sharing their knowledge with Generation X and also with millennials. You know, Generation X is kind of a smaller group in there, but they are the ones that are probably most likely to be in that succession pipeline that you've got. Now, better known as the millennials or Gen Y is what we've got, do seem to make up the majority of some of the workforce that we go through. In fact, they were just under the Generation X in our audience in doing this. And then, you know, Generation Y, this millennial, not only make up the majority, but they are then helping the Gen Z, which are going to be, you know, just barely entering that workforce now in some ways, and there's definitely going to be a majority in the coming years. As somebody said in a conference I was at recently, you know, what are we going to do? We're going to call the next generation AA and going forward. So it should be interesting as we watch the future and going forward. So today we're going to focus on the generation gap between the baby boomers and the millennials. But before we talk about how to close that gap between them, we need to understand them better in what we're doing. So when we look at research, and research has a way of influencing our thinking. I can't say I always agree with this, but like I said, we're all kind of bombarded with this research. So we baby boomers, research kind of tells us what we think of the millennials is that number one, they can be lazy. Number two, they're job hoppers. And number three, we're impatient. And again, we may agree or disagree, but again, all this research begins to influence us and tell us. So, Katie, why don't you tell us what you think of us baby boomers?
Well, Judy, as you said, might not be my opinion, but this is what the research shows. Millennials generally think that baby boomers are closed-minded, that they're workaholics, and that they're extremely competitive.
There you go. So, you know, this is kind of how everybody sees each other. It's no wonder there's some misunderstanding, you know, when you start thinking about these different generations. So let's dive a little deeper. What really defines a baby boomer? Well, first of all, they followed the silent generation, those traditionalists that we knew about. They normally cover an age group that was born mid-40s to early 60s. And that phrase baby boom refers to a noticeable increase in the birth rate that was after World War II, and we'll do that. We feel we're among the first generation to grow up genuinely expecting the world to improve with time. We're the ones that, you know, did everything from Woodstock to, you know, peace and love and whatever it might be. So, you know, we were kind of looking at the world to improve in time to do that. And some general characteristics of those baby boomers in the workforce is that, first of all, they're productive, they're hard-working members of the organization. They're very loyal to their company. In fact, I mean, many times when we're working with organizations, you find that these are the individuals who've been with their company 15, 18, 20, 25 years or more in doing that. They're willing to put in long hours to get the job done. I mean, I think the, you know, kind of 50-hour work week or more is very common. And then they're skilled team players. And they like to feel valued in their organization. And also they prefer to have conversations in person and that face-to-face. So, Katie, tell us about the millennials.
Sure. So millennials follow Generation X. We're typically born between the late 70s and the late 90s. And some of you might not know, but millennials are referred to as echo boomers. And the reason we're referred to as echo boomers is because of the surge of birth rates, you know, after the baby boomers. And the reason for this is because most millennials are the children of baby boomers. And we're generally marked by an increased use and familiarity with communications, media, and digital technology. So while baby boomers, you know, prefer that in-person contact, we like to do things digitally.
So tell us some more about some characteristics about millennials in the workplace.
Yeah, so millennials in the workplace are typically open-minded and excited about career opportunities. We're exceptionally goal-oriented and great multitaskers. We're skilled collaborators who crave open, honest relationships with our managers. We desire to genuinely enjoy our jobs as well as the people that work with us, so culture is extremely important. And as I kind of said, we're really into technology, so we rely heavily on digital means of communication.
Very good. Okay, so what's the reality? We're sitting here talking about some assumptions, and so what's the reality? So we just said, sometimes baby boomers look at millennials and we think they're lazy, job hoppers, impatient, but the reality is they really like a work-life balance, very entrepreneurial, and they strive to excel. And then sometimes what happens is that millennials look at baby boomers and they feel they're closed-minded, they're workaholics, and they're competitive, when the reality is that they enjoy structure, they're very hardworking, and they're motivated. So what we've got to keep in mind is that all of the things that we begin to look at sometimes are just that, they're assumptions in what we're doing. So let's kind of look at this area of technology. And Katie, will you take us through our next poll?
Sure. So our next poll is, at what age did you start using the internet? And I want to specify that by internet we mean email, mobile browsing, anything that you had to get online for, not just on a computer. So were you 10 years old or younger, 11 to 20 years old, 21 to 30 years old, 31 to 40 years old, or 41 years old or older? All right, Judy, we've already got about half of the people that voted. We'll give it a few more seconds. All right, it looks like we've got a little over 3/4 voted. So as you can see, Judy, the majority of the people started using the internet between 11 and 20 years old.
Wow. What was the next one then after that?
21 to 30 years old was 31%, and then we've got 31 to 40 years old at 21%.
Okay, all right. That's kind of surprising. I would have thought the one that came out on the top was at 21 to 30, based on our audience. So again, great, and we have to start thinking about it's not just the computer or so on, but we're talking about the internet. When did it even come in, and looking at that? Okay, so what are some of the differences that we want to look at between baby boomers and millennials? Well, first of all, let's think about communication styles. Baby boomers, again, we've said, really like that one-on-one and more in-person communication, and the millennials prefer using technology to communicate. And their approach to working. Baby boomers seek work as a means of providing for their families, and they've got intense company loyalty because of that, where millennials are more interested in taking their lifestyle and aligning that with what they do. It's that work-life balance that's important to them, and they seek more flexibility and meaning from the work. Now, when it comes to learning styles, again, baby boomers like the more traditional learning, classroom, interaction, people, where millennials prefer collaborative and probably a little more technology-focused learning in what they're doing. And here we are at that work-life balance. Baby boomers usually see an imbalance between work and family. I mean, they probably were the ones that invented that 50-hour work week and what we do. Where millennials see work-life balance as something that they've just got to have. They prefer more flexibility with work hours and work location in doing that. And many times what we find is they may have fewer hours actually in the office and maybe more hours that they put using technology at another location in doing them. Now, baby boomers see skill development as an absolute necessity and an ingredient to success. where millennials are more motivated by the opportunity to develop skills in what they're doing. And again, baby boomers prefer that more defined organizational hierarchy in doing something. They want equal opportunities in a friendly environment because, again, it's more that social interaction. And millennials prefer a collaborative environment that is achievement-oriented and is probably more positive and flexible in doing that. So what's leadership strategies going to be? I mean, what does leadership need to be able to do to be able to bring all these things together? Well, as leaders, it's important to look at harnessing the strength of your multi-generational workforce. Use those differences to your advantage. You know, each generation brings a different set of values, beliefs, and expectations that reflect the political and cultural times in which they were born. So embracing these differences help you build a cohesive and more well-rounded organization. In addition to that, you know, changes are hard to ignore. So stop trying. New generations are going to do things differently, and you gotta remember, different isn't always bad. So if your leadership team understands these differences, they're gonna be able to help individuals grow their leadership skills more effectively. And then think about your team strength. Diversifying your team is going to help it become stronger. If you have different ideas and perspectives that are being shared, you're going to see more results from your organization's results in doing that. So at this point in time, let's kind of stop. And Katie, have we got any questions that have come up at this point?
Yeah, Judy, we do. We actually have a question that came in asking about Generation X and if we had any data on them, kind of like we did with the millennials and the baby boomers. So, Stephen, I'm going to let you take this one since you're our Gen X representative. And Stephen, why didn't we talk about Gen X and how do you think that they fit in with these generations?
Thank you, Katie. I think that's a really good question. But just from my personal experience, I really think it's down to two reasons. First reason is age, and second reason is technology. So with age, we really, we can relate to baby boomers and millennials because there's less of an age gap. So we have a little bit more in common, and we're able to develop a personal and professional relationship faster. So that's really number one. And with technology, I remember many years ago, there was less online technology. So the majority workforce was baby boomers. So we're used to working with them and picking up the phone. And even today, I still like to have a face-to-face conversation when you really can't solve the problem, with an email or some sort of instant chat. And then we can really also relate to millennials. I don't know if everyone remembers, but I was part of the dot-com boom. So I worked for a big dot-com company, and we really did start the big internet sites. So we're all familiar with that. And I don't know if everyone remembers the mobile phones. I remember many years ago, I did have a phone, and the only way I could afford it was really send texts. So we've communicated for a long time through text messages. So if someone's a millennial starts sending texts, that's it's fine. We're used to that. So yeah, I think it's really down to those two reasons.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Judy, we do have another question. I'm going to let you take this one. Judy, why are there so many differences between these generations, especially since most millennials were raised by baby boomers?
Oh, good question. And Stephen, I really liked your answer about Generation X. You're kind of stuck in the middle there between all of us, between the baby boomers and these millennials. But I think that actually goes into some of the differences. You've got baby boomers, they raise the millennials, and part of it I think has to do with just human nature. As kids, we're going to say, I'm not going to do it the way my parents did it. So millennials are kind of looking at that in going forward. Again, probably millennials looked at their parents and they worked maybe a lot of hours, maybe weren't around exactly, because they felt that they had to provide for their families in being able to do that. So, millennials, again, are kind of saying, I'm not going to do it, the way my parents did, or those people in that generation. And then, again, we keep coming up with technology, but I think it's an issue. Again, baby boomers weren't raised with technology in doing that, where I think, millennials, you could be 5 or 6 anymore, and the first thing, you want is a phone or something. I mean, even the youngest toys that people have, are some kind of technology that's been created. So it's a different part of technology when it was introduced and being familiar. But again, like I said, kids always say, I'm not going to do it the way my parents did in doing that.
Great, thank you, Judy. The last question I'm going to go ahead and take. So the last question is, why is work-life balance a bigger deal for millennials than it is for baby boomers? I think that for me personally and for a lot of my peers, having a work-life balance is all about being able to live a life outside of the 8-hour-a-day, 5-day-a-week work environment that so many generations have become accustomed to. Millennials are all about technology and doing things digitally, and we see that technology frees us to work productively from anywhere and at any time. So it's not really about working less or not working as hard. It's more about working in a way that's both productive and suited for our lifestyles. Judy, I loved what you said about, the way that millennials watched their baby boomer parents. And I think that that's another thing that really, kind of gets us to want more of a work-life balance is, I can tell you right now that my parents both work 50 to 60-hour work weeks. And they always have from when I was little and as long as I can remember. And so while I appreciate that and I want to work just as hard as they always have, I really, I leave at 5 every day, and I want that to be a nice balance between the two. And I also think that, for a lot of baby boomer families, there was not always 2 parents working. I read a stat the other day that said that only 47% of baby boomer families had 2 full-time employed parents. And when you look at millennials, a lot of us are in families that have 2 full-time working parents. So in order to really maintain a household and still be able to raise a family, we need that flexibility.
Yeah, that's a very good point, is the fact that it seems to cost more, in doing that. So very unusual that you don't have 2 working parents in doing that. So, okay, thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Katie, in looking at those things and all 3 generations. So how do we close that gap between these generations? Well, we believe that mentoring is the most effective way in which to do that, in doing that. So what we want to do is we want to talk about a concept called cross-generational mentoring. And what that really means is it's pairing a person from one generation with a person from a different generation with the goal of mutual learning and growth. It recognizes there are skill gaps on both sides in what you're learning, but it really creates a bridge to eliminate some of those generational gaps, because when you're focused on knowledge areas and you get off the focus of age or whatever that might be, and it helps to create that bridge. By creating that partnership between the younger and the older generations, and they're sharing experiences and skills, new ways of working, again, it really helps to eliminate some of those generational focuses and the skill gaps that exist. And it makes it okay for each generation to become familiar with the other generation's differences and their strengths, but also remembering that some of those differences can be individual benefits for both the mentor and the mentee in looking at this and going back. So, Katie, will you take us through our next poll, please?
Sure. So our next poll is, what do you think is the biggest challenge in multi-generational mentoring relationships? Is it preferred communication styles, honest feedback, lack of confidence, lack of respect, or dedicating time? All right, the votes are coming in. Judy, we're at almost 50%, so we're just going to give it a few more seconds. All right, and it looks like almost everyone has had a chance to vote. So we're going to go ahead and close the poll. All right, so Judy, it looks like we're kind of all over the place with challenges. We've got dedicating time at 30%, lack of respect, honest feedback, and preferred communication styles all are at 22%, and then lack of confidence is at 4%.
Wow, that's interesting. Although actually, I can't say I'm surprised about dedicating time and doing that, because every time we talk about mentoring and what people kind of perceive as a possible challenge, time is always the one that comes up in doing that, no matter what kind of mentoring it is, as you go forward in doing that. So, but thanks for those results. That's interesting. I love that lack of confidence at 4%. So very good. That one I really kind of like, and that one's still low. So when we talk about, possible challenges for mentoring and what you're doing, Katie, can you start us off on this one?
Sure. So, we will discuss these challenges and kind of the way that each side sees them. So first off is communication styles. And Judy, I know we've mentioned this a couple of times, and it just really shows you how important this is for both generations. But communication styles, like we said, millennials prefer to communicate virtually. So we do a lot of things digitally. We like email, we like Skype, we like messaging, whereas baby boomers would rather have an in-person meeting or a phone conversation. They have to have that personal connection to feel like they're getting something accomplished. And I know Stephen mentioned that as well, that Gen X does that too, whereas millennials kind of shy away from that in-person meeting. Second, we have honest feedback. So, millennials crave honest feedback. I said this earlier when I was describing us in the workplace. We want to have an open and honest relationship with our managers. We want to be told where we're excelling and where we need to have some work done. But at the same time, we may feel uncomfortable giving feedback to an older colleague. Whereas baby boomers, they might not feel like they need the feedback, and they also might not feel that the feedback they're getting from millennials is as valuable because they aren't as experienced and they haven't had as much time in the workplace. And then the third one is that millennials may lack confidence needed to mentor a baby boomer. This can be a big deal for a millennial who might have just entered the workplace or who might not see themselves as being experienced. And most baby boomers are in a leadership position, so it can be a little difficult for a millennial to feel like they have anything that they can bring of value to that relationship. In the same respect, the baby boomer may lack confidence in the millennial's ability to teach and learn.
Very good. Okay. But, when you think about it, because these two generations, we've already talked about don't always understand each other, the really good chances are that they lack a mutual respect for each other. And that can be a challenge. And then we already talked about, when you went through the polls, the time. Sometimes people are unwilling not only to dedicate time, because time's such an issue for all of us, but, if they are going to put that time together, it needs to be somebody they respect. And they're liable not to do that if there is a lack of respect. So how do we make all this work in doing this? Well, first of all, what you've got to do is you've got to understand career expectations. We've already talked about the fact that each generation has different expectations of what their career should look like. And these differences need to be explored, and realistic expectations need to be discussed by both parties in doing that. And there also needs to be a communications plan that, really help both sides, both mentors and mentees, to resolve some of the communication styles that we've talked about, that difference between face-to-face and technology, and benefits of both in doing that. And then that honest feedback. Honesty is going to be extremely important because of some of the vast differences between the generations in doing that. So feedback helps each individual know how that relationship and partnership is working. And then we need to appreciate each individual's strengths and the individual types of knowledge and experience that each individual brings. We need to think about those, because especially we need to ignore the stereotypes that are going through and embrace some of those differences. Things aren't always what they seem in going through that. So mutual respect is really the key. Baby boomers and millennials are different, but they do have one thing in common. They both want to be respected. Respect for coworkers and their roles in the workplace encourages a very interconnected work atmosphere. And it helps to minimize workplace conflict and keeps the focus being more positive. Mutual respect fosters collaboration and cooperation. These are essential ingredients for creating a workforce that values productivity, performance, and the quality of what it offers. They're all factors that affect the profitability of the organization. So it's not just the individuals, but you've got to think about these things put together can affect the overall organization. Because employees who respect their coworkers are also likely to respect their colleagues' level of expertise and their range of knowledge, and the effectiveness of a mentoring partnership is going to depend on the respect for the mentor's expertise, regardless of job title or regardless of the generation that they represent. So why do you want to choose mentoring to close the generation gap? Well, first of all, it does connect different generations that have got a common purpose in what they're doing. It provides a positive environment for each generation in how they're moving forward, and it gives them the ability to learn about each other, and it allows different generations to learn each other's working styles in being together. Coworkers of different generations can offer each other the chance to learn new skills. For instance, younger workers can offer senior staff members tips on technology and some of those types of things. But senior workers can share deep industry knowledge or offer advice on the organization's culture and its background and those types of things. The whole trick is bringing people together and giving them the opportunity to share those benefits in doing that. So what are some of the benefits of doing this? Well, first of all, knowledge transfer is important, and also it gives you a stronger succession pipeline. Baby boomers are retiring. In fact, they're probably going to be all gone by 2029. That's only 11 years away to share all the knowledge and prepare that next generation to take over. Also, you've got increased employee engagement, which boosts productivity. Actually, studies show that employees are retained longer, work harder, and produce better quality work when they feel content in the workplace. And employees who've been mentored actually express greater workplace content. And then you've got increased retention rates. 77% of companies with mentoring programs say they improve employee retention and job performance. Now, 81% of the millennials with mentors report they're happy with them and they're twice as likely to stay with a company for more than 5 years in being able to do that. In fact, that was one of the things Katie talked about. But Katie, give us your experience in doing this.
Sure, Judy. I think these benefits are really on point for what all generations are looking for when they start with a company and look for longevity with a company, especially millennials. You said it before, we're seen as job hoppers. And if you look at my resume, I have had 3 jobs in the past 4 years. That might not be attractive to some employers, but when you sit back and discuss this and look at the reasons why, a big part of that was because I didn't feel engaged and I didn't feel like I was gaining any knowledge from the position that I was in. I didn't feel like there was any career development to push me forward. And that's really what a lot of millennials want. And I think what a lot of people in the workforce want these days is to move forward in their career and really develop. So I chose to leave those jobs because I didn't feel like I could really progress in that company. So now that I've found a position where I gain a mentoring sense of relationships, and I'm gaining career development, and there's a lot of knowledge being transferred between me and my managers, I feel like I'm in a position where I'm more stable and I look for a future within Sala, which is something that really drove me to want to work here.
Great. I can tell you're one of those 81% of the millennials that really feel like they want to stay with an organization for more than 5 years, and we hope you do. Okay, so, we're going to talk about now how to implement a mentoring program for multiple generations. And there's a couple things you need to think about. The first thing you have to think about is your objectives, and you have got to define the organization's objectives to determine what the needs are and what type of mentoring program to implement. One of the things that we suggest you might want to think about is to have a multi-generational advisory board. Most organization leaders will be from an older generation, and you want to be sure that there's that representation from the younger individuals so that all the needs are being assessed as you're going forward and doing this. So you've got to think in terms and find out what are the organization's objectives in what they want to be able to accomplish. Now, the other thing, excuse me, that we want you to think about is different types of mentoring. And you've got traditional mentoring, and that's always there. But what are some of the possible modern mentoring situations that you might want to think about? Flash mentoring, reverse mentoring, or what we call distance, or some organizations call it virtual mentoring, where literally your mentor and mentee are in 2 very, very different locations, but it's that knowledge sharing that's the most important in what you're going to be doing. And then after you've looked at your objectives, you've got to look at your matching criteria to be able to do that and take it. I apologize, not quite sure what's happening here. Okay. And when you look at your matching criteria, first of all, you've got to consider what the criteria is that differentiates these generations that you've got within your organization. And that could be years with the organization. It could be career level. It doesn't always have to be age that you're looking at, although that may be a factor. If you don't want to just consider age, look at those years of experience and knowledge. You actually could have someone who's younger who has more experience and knowledge in a given area and being able to do that. And then we suggest you use a type of mentoring technology to be able to do some of your matching and pairing. Now, here's the reason that becomes so important. Because if I'm looking for a mentor and what I'm doing, I really want to look at what it is I as the mentee want to learn and who's got that knowledge. And I want to be able to look at it outside of age and title and so on and so forth. What your mentoring technology allows you to do is to really begin to look at it much more objectively. So you've got, an individual who said, here's what I really want to learn. And then the other side of that is your technology will tell you, here are the individuals where that's that area of expertise. And again, it's looking at what people want to know and how they want to be able to interact. And it takes away such things as age or job title or so on. Your mentoring technology really helps you to do this. And, Katie, I know that you've got an example of this.
Yeah, Judy, I think that, going back to what you said about the matching and making sure that, the mentor and the mentee are both gaining something from this relationship and making sure that it's really mutually beneficial. I had an experience where I was lucky enough to be mentored by the CEO of a company that I worked for. So, I learned a lot from him based on his experience with leadership development and the industry that we worked in that I was so new in. And, we were in a mentoring relationship for 2 to 3 years where I gained so much that I still carry on in my career now. And in the same respect, I was able to mentor him too in sort of a reverse mentoring situation where, I mentioned in the beginning, I work in digital marketing, and that was a foreign concept for him. That was when businesses were really starting to get into social media and SEO was really taking over. And I knew a lot about those topics that I was able to teach him and ultimately make a difference in the organization because we started implementing those ideas.
I think that's great, and I really love that. One of the phrases that I always use, and you probably heard me as I've talked throughout this, is a mentoring partnership. And what that partnership really means is you're learning from each other. It's not a matter of one is always giving and the other is always taking and doing that. But it is a partnership, and you're learning from each other. And I really like that example, Katie. Thank you for that and doing that. So we've talked about the fact that you've got to define your organizational objectives. I mean, that's just number one. And then you want to think about your matching criteria based on some of that in doing that. But don't forget the training. Don't forget to train your individual. One of the things that we many times see in organizations is there's an assumption that everybody knows how to be a mentor and everybody knows how to be a mentee. We're saying, that's not true. So you need to think about the benefits for both the mentor and the mentee, because again, sometimes the feeling is, well, the mentee is the one that's getting all the benefits. Well, Katie just gave us an example where the mentor got the benefits also. And I'm telling you, we hear all the time from organizations that we work with, and mentors tell us they really value all the things they learn from their mentee. So make sure that both mentors and mentees understand the benefits on both sides. And then define each role and the phases of that partnership and what they're doing. I just this week was working with an organization, and we were training both mentors and mentees. And during that time, we handed out job descriptions. So when we were teaching the mentees, we handed them their job descriptions so they understood very specifically what their responsibilities were. And we also handed out the mentor's job description so they could see what they could expect from their mentor. And when we did the mentor training, again, we handed the mentors their job description, and then we handed them the mentee's job description so they knew what they could expect from them. You really wouldn't ask anybody, or you shouldn't ask anybody, let's say that, to take on a role that they really did not understand, and they didn't know what it was all about. And what happens as that role then begins to, those responsibilities are actually implemented, that talk about the phases, and whose responsibility at each part and each phase of that. Definitely highlight some possible challenges that may occur for each generation. Now, I always use the phrase possible challenges. And the reason for that is the fact that a challenge isn't a disadvantage. A challenge is just something that may possibly happen, may not, but it may happen. But you want people to kind of be ready for the possibility of it, and make sure that you give them some ideas on how to solve it in doing that. Many times what we hear when we take mentors and mentees and the organization as a whole through training is we get what's called what if situations. And people will say, well, what if this happens? Or what if that happens? And you need to have those. And you need to have answers to those, and especially have what they have to do with it, individual generation. And most of all, remind them to stay open-minded. Think about all the benefits of those differences, and don't be judgmental. Don't make assumptions before you even get into the partnership as to what's going to be going on. So kind of as a recap of what we've been talking about today, it's important to not only understand the differences between generations in the organization, but also to embrace those differences, those kind of things that are going to bring the workforce together. Cross-generational mentoring creates that bridge that begins to eliminate those generational gaps that may exist. It takes it out of looking at just age or job title and puts it specifically on those areas of what someone wants to learn and what another person's area of expertise is. But beware of those possible challenges that the generations may face when they work together. And make sure you provide some training to create some solutions for these possibilities. And you want to make sure you do that before a mentoring partnership begins. And then don't forget to take all generations into consideration when you're implementing your mentoring program. And again, we talked about that possible putting together that advisory board that you might want to have that will get both sides of what your objectives might want to be as you go forward. So at this point in time, Katie, can you tell us what the future holds?
Sure, Judy. So if you'll look in your chat box, there is a link to our next webinar that I've just put there. So our next webinar is going to be on March 21st, and its title is How to Overcome 3 Major Challenges When Managing a Mentoring Program. So if you're looking to implement a mentoring program or you already have one, and especially if you're managing a mentoring program, this would be a great webinar for you to go to and just learn how to come up with some solutions before these possible challenges even arise. So if you click on the link, it should take you straight to the registration page. All right, Judy, it looks like we've got about 10 minutes left, so we do have some time for questions. If you're ready to take those, we have a couple.
I am.
All right, great. We did have a couple that came in specifically talking about mentoring to a younger generation, or the younger generation being a mentor, I'm sorry. So one of the questions we had was, can you give some examples of modern mentoring, especially in the instance where the mentor is younger? So maybe a reverse mentoring relationship.
Yeah, actually I can. And we see this happening quite often. And one example of that had to do with a very large organization. They're in the aeronautics industry, located in Texas. And one of the things that they had, and this actually was several years ago before the term reverse mentoring really became as popular as it is now. But the individual who was the mentee was the general manager of the manufacturing facility. And the mentor, again, was someone who was much younger, had been with the organization a much less time. And one of the things that the mentee, this GM, really wanted to know was they felt like they'd lost touch. I mean, it had been a long time since they'd been a new individual inside this organization. And so they really wanted to understand, what's it like being more than a new person in the organization. And this was a whole lot more than just, asking questions and an interview was saying, well, can you tell me what it's like? I mean, they actually had a plan that they put together in which the mentor, who again, this newer, younger person, walked them through several situations that they were involved in. This was about a 6-month partnership that they put together in doing this. And at the end, the mentee, again, who was the GM, felt like they had a much better view of what was going on inside the organization than they did before they started that partnership in going forward. And like I said, they had a plan There were activities very specifically about this, and they really made it work. Now, another example was with a client we have that is a very global organization, and they've got mentors and mentees spread out all over the place in doing this. In fact, we've had one situation in which the mentee was in France and the mentor was in New Jersey. And the mentee that was in France actually was looking for a better understanding around social media. So it wasn't just technology, because they could use their point, but really, how do you make the most of social media and using it as a better communication tool with individuals that reported to them? And again, this was not just tell me about it. This was not just an interview. They actually, there's a difference between telling and developing and doing this. They actually had a plan in place, and they worked together, and, not only learning that the, senior level individual that was the mentee in France, not only just learning, but actually, having activities. And then, going through those activities and learning more about social media and communicating using social media and working with that mentor, again, younger person that was in New Jersey, and working with that mentor to say, okay, in this situation, what we've talked about really worked. In this one, it didn't. What changes do they need to make? And again, you got to keep in mind that these types of things are a whole lot more than just having a conversation or asking somebody. There actually was real development, real activities, and a real plan that was put together. So those are just a couple of examples of where we've seen reverse mentoring really work well.
Great, thanks, Judy. We have one more question if you have time. Looks like we still have a few more minutes.
I do.
Okay, great. So our next question is, how do we get executive buy-in when we're pushing to have this multi-generational mentoring program?
Yeah. That can sometimes be a real problem in doing that, because many people from a senior level that you want to get the buy-in from are really looking at what I call a top-down type of mentoring situation, and really saying, it's got to be our more senior individuals in the mentor role, and the less senior, are in the mentee role. First of all, we believe mentoring is a business strategy. And this is not just a warm, fuzzy, feel-good program. This is a business strategy. And letting, some of the things that we talked about that were the benefits of multi-generational, types of things that were going on. And what the biggest thing is, looking at some of those differences. Look at all the things that you can get out of everyone. Look at being able to, different ideas, different diversity of thought in doing that. If you've got a more diverse team, it's going to help your organization become stronger in doing that. Being able to share different ideas and, perspectives and so on, that can only help your organization be more productive. Think in terms of those types of things that we talked about in mentoring, and retention, and being able to take that through. And we talked about that 77% of companies with mentoring programs say they improve employee retention and job performance. We all know that retention hits the bottom line. No matter what you do, retention hits the bottom line. And so that's saving money in everything that you're doing. So that's another. So just be able to take business statistics to your senior management, because again, I know that can be, kind of difficult to get them to do that.
Great, thanks, Judy. It does look like that we're about out of time, so I want to thank everyone again for attending today's webinar, and just a reminder, we will be sending everyone an email with a link to the recording of this webinar later today, so be sure to look for that in your inbox. If we weren't able to get to your questions, as you could see on Judy's screen for the last part, we did have the contact information. Oh, Judy put it back up. We have the contact information up. Please feel free to contact us at any time, and we'd love to continue this conversation with with you. And we hope that you all have a really great day.
Thank you very much for your participation, and we would love to connect with you. Even though I'm a baby boomer, I'm really good at technology. So we'd love to connect with you.